Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast where I cover all things science fiction. My name is Arnav Thapa, and today we will be diving into the formation of the genre of science fiction, the topic of science fiction regarding cinema, the technology used, and the movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang. And we will also be diving into the book 1984 by George Orwell. Previously, on the last podcast, we discussed the history and inspiration of science fiction, and today we will discuss science fiction cinema and the technological advances that came with it. We will also be extending our knowledge of history and diving into a deeper discussion regarding science fiction. So stay tuned to the end of this podcast to learn more about science fiction and maybe even have a different stance on it. Beginning with the formation of the genre, we will discuss the book Science Fiction Cinema by Christine Cornea and how this genre transformed into what it is today. Christine Cornea, the author, describes science fiction as the branch of literature that deals with human response to changes in the level of science and technology. Cornea states that science fiction is literature that makes use of traditional scientific methods to examine postulated approximation of reality. But let's take a few steps back and discuss how the genre formed. Christine Cornea, in the introduction of her book, informs the reader that authors like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells played a crucial part in the formation of the science fiction genre, and that a part of science fiction was heavily influenced by their work. For example, H.G. Wells' novel, The War of the Worlds, went from being a novel to a film that didn't have a stable genre. When this film entered the cinema industry, it was regarded as a scientific romance. Another example of scientific romance that entered the cinema industry was Jules Verne's stories From the Earth to the Moon and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Both Jules Verne and H.G. Wells' story-turned movies were a success in the cinemas, and their work was a pathway to a new genre that they had just created. Shortly after their success, Verne and Wells celebrated for their work in the formation of respected canons of the genre. And shortly after their work, the cinema industry and technology were becoming very, very popular. We will now head towards the topic of technology regarding science fiction cinema. Science fiction in this era is very well known for its devotion to technological display. During the early 1900s, many films came out that was under science fiction genre, and among those films were George Méliès's Le Voyage dans la Lune, which came out in 1902. Le Voyage dans la Lune was the most famous proto-science fiction film, and this film displayed a twofold convention of presenting new and innovative technologies. During the 1920s, a new innovative way of cinema was the creation of the silent film era. During this era, many movies were created with no talking and just visuals. An example of the movies that was a part of the silent film era was Metropolis, directed by Fritz Lang in 1927. Although Metropolis was not the first ever silent movie created, it was the most famous one. Metropolis is a movie about a son of the city's mastermind and how he falls in love with a prophet who is from the working class. The prophet also predicts the coming of a savior to mediate their differences. The movie Metropolis predicted or even influenced many modern technological advances such as video calling, and it even influenced many modern movies, such as Blade Runner and several Batman movies. Along with silent movies, the introduction of special effects was also an example of innovative technology in science fiction cinema. An example of movies that use special effects is Méliès's Le Voyage dans la Lune and Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon. Both these movies used in-camera tricks to show the idea of space travel, life outside Earth, and major forms of futuristic technologies. We will now head towards the book 1984 by George Orwell and how it played its role in science fiction. The book 1984 takes place in dystopian London, where Winston Smith, the protagonist, is a member of the ruling party there. The themes of this book that Orwell portrays are government oppression, propaganda, and lack of individual freedom. Dystopian London at this time was very totalitarian, and the threat of nuclear wars initiated by those in the power was very feared by Orwell. Another idea that is portrayed in the novel is the idea of a surveillance state and how every action is monitored by the government. Actions like thinking independently are punishable by death and are one of the main reasons that the theme of government oppression and lack of individual freedom is very prevalent. Since the release of this book, 1984 by George Orwell has been transformed in many different forms of media, such as movies, radio, and even podcasts, like the one from BBC Radio 4. As we now come to an end of our discussion, we have discussed the evolving concepts of technology regarding science fiction cinema and even learned about the history of science fiction cinema. From the movies Metropolis by Fritz Lang to George Orwell's novel 1984, we have learned about the haunting idea of totalitarianism and how all the articles, movies, and books have inspired change in our world in regards to science fiction. Thank you all for tuning into my podcast. I'm Arnav Thapa, and I will see you next time. Thank you.